The sport of off-road racing is full of incredible stories, wild characters, legends, and even villains. We cover it all on offroadracer.com, but there's only so much we can put down in an article. Sometimes we have to dig a little deeper, and that means sitting down with some of our industry's most influential characters and hitting record. Welcome to the Off-Road Racer podcast, a Mad Media production, made exclusively for offroadracer.com. Each month, we'll go beyond the dirt into the homes, shops, and lives of the most interesting and game-changing icons of our sport. You'll hear about their history, success, failure, and everything in between as we pull back the curtain and reveal the stories of their lives. I'm your host, Matt Martelli, and this is the Off-Road Racer podcast. I'm Matt Martelli. This is the Off-Road Racer podcast, and I'm here with the mighty Nestor Beradi. What's up, man?
How's it going?
Good, man. I'm glad you made it down. This has been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And we had lunch the other day, and I was like, hey, can you make it down?
Yeah. I've been watching the podcast, and I'm really happy to be here because it's like for the older generation of fabricators and builders and things, like we don't do this kind of stuff. So it's like out of our element, right. But it's good to get out there and show people that, you know, what we've done in the past and how that's shaped the future and future generations, and how builders nowadays are kind of get to piggyback off what we used to do. And it's just exciting. I like it. Yeah, no, it's really cool. And that's part of why I did it is like, I know who you are, right? And I understand from a cultural standpoint, probably more than anybody, what the effect of you creating Trophykarts has had, you know, on the global off-road culture. And we'll start with that. But, you know, it's funny because I'm at Dakar like 4 years ago, right? It was the first year that it went to Saudi. And we're at the end of a stage, and there's, you know, Cyril Dupre and, you know, all the heavies, you know, who have won Dakar in the past that are still racing. And they're all freaking out because Mitch Guthrie Jr. is coming through. And they're like, I don't understand. Like, why is this boy so fast? And, you know, I always mess up the French accent, but it's like, you know, they were just dumbfounded, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like smiling because I'm like, hey, we have hundreds of these kids coming, because Mitchie is one of those kids that he started in Trophykarts like 6 years old and acquired the skill set of racing, you know, and now he's in his early 20s. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know, these older guys who start an off-road racing career after they've had another racing career or a successful business, like that's not going to work anymore, you know, because of Trophykarts, right? And so for me, it was a really gratifying moment, and I'm glad to like talk about it with you because, you know, like you created something that fundamentally changed the landscape of off-road racing. It brought in younger people, it brought in families, you know, and, you know, it was followed by UTVs, but it was really Trophykarts that started that revolution. You know, what's that like for you to, you know, sit back now and realize that? Yeah. So going back to the beginning when I was doing, you know, I was building pre-runners, race trucks, things like that. And when I started doing it, it was in 2004, and there was the 50s craze. Remember all the little 50s running around?
PW bikes? 50s, yep.
So that was all running around. I was not a dirt bike guy. I was just trucks, and then I was doing airplane stuff. I mean, I'm huge into airplanes and RC cars, things like that. So I wasn't a motorcycle guy, but I saw these people having a good time when they'd go out to pits and they're like run their little pit bikes around and stuff. And I'm like, what if I took a go-kart and I made a pit bike out of a go-kart, like a little truck? And I was talking to my friends and I'm like, hey, let's do something different. And they're like, oh, no one's gonna want that. Like that's weird.
It's like, dumb. Everybody always says that about good ideas.
Yeah. And I'm like, and then I was kind of like gauging like who's going to like this. And I'm, you know, some point I'm like, I don't care who likes it. I like it. I want to build a little miniature trophy truck out of a go-kart. And so I started designing it, putting it together. I talked to Brett King, and I'm like, can you make me little mini King shocks? Because at that time, there wasn't such thing as that. So he's like, yeah, I think we can do something. So he built me these miniature shocks, and everything was billet. Like I made it like look like a little trophy truck. And I took it to Barstow, went down Barstow, Maine with it, me in it, not a kid. And I'm in there just running down Barstow, Maine, and I had all these people follow me. They're chasing me down. What is that thing? What is that? And I'm like, I don't even know what it is. I just like it. I'm having a good time. And I had all these other people like going to the shop, because my shop, I wasn't advertising anything at the time. There wasn't social media at the time. So they're coming to the shop. They're like, I heard about this little go-kart, what I want to see it. So I had all these groups of people showing up to my shop just to look at it. And I'd let people drive it. And finally, one of the guys said, hey, let's start a little racing series with these things. So I took it to, where was it? That was the first race was at, was it Milestone? No. I think it was, it might have been Milestone, the first race. But we went out there. We had a couple cars. It was me, Tim Casey, and one other guy. And we just did like a couple laps, and everybody flipped out. They're just like, oh my God, this is crazy. We need to build more of these. And then Core heard about it,
right,
which was
Baldwin's.
Yeah, Jim Baldwin. And at the time, I had a friend, Tony Rutledge, that said, hey, I'll get us into Core. I'll do a little event. We'll build 10 cars. We'll race there. Well, we had Steve Serapis, Rodrigo Ampudia, the Herps, all the Herps.
They all had kids.
They all have kids. They all said, we want these things. Let's do a race. So there was 10 cars out there. The first race, it was just like, Jim's like, I don't know what to expect. These are little kids out there. They're, 6 to 8 years old. Who knows what's going to happen? And we built these crazy jumps because we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. We built these crazy jumps. Rodrigo and this other kid cross up in the middle of the jump. Rodrigo tumbles over the jump, crashes, and we stop the race. We're like, okay, so we just killed a kid. Like, okay, it's over. We run over there. Rodrigo, it was Alan actually, jumps out of the car, gets on top of the car, and starts, cheering the crowd. Pumping. Like getting the crowd going. The crowd went crazy.
Right.
Crazy. And so we got him back in the car. He kept going. And after that day, we sold, it was like 60 cars that day.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I took it to a off-road expo show, sold another 30 cars there, and then we took it to another off-road expo show. That's when Nick Baldwin came in and said, I need to be a part of this, and I'm going to help you get it, like really launch it. But at the time, it was Nick was there and Jesse James was there.
Right.
So Jesse James pulled me aside. He says, I want to do this with you. Let's do it. So I had like two potential investors that are like wanting to do this. And I went with Nick because I just knew him.
Yeah.
And we launched it. I mean, we went big. And we ended up selling 3,500 cars. And I mean, you think 3,500 cars is a lot of cars. So
it's a lot of cars.
When you think about, like, we had a picture taken at Chula Vista, and there was just there's about 60 cars that were all lined up there. And people are like, man, isn't that a good feeling? Looking at check out all these cars you made. And I'm like, I'm just tired. That just makes me really tired. It doesn't make, like, it's a good feeling, but it's like, because I just think about all the late nights, the welds that weren't perfect that I had to go and change, the bolts that were put in backwards because I had a bunch of guys that were trying to as we go, we're creating a production line of cars
Right.
really quickly. And so it was a big deal. And actually, it's kind of funny because I've talked to Robbie Gordon a lot about this same situation, and he said, "How the heck did you do it? Like, I'm having such a hard time."
Yeah, he's dealing with the same issues now.
And it's a much more advanced car than what I was building. Mine was very simple, but I'm like, yeah, I get it. And so I give him credit for what he's doing. Like, it's a
tremendously.
hard job. I mean, and it's easy to critique it. And like, yeah, he's, everybody's making mistakes and things, people do that. But yeah, he's a uphill battle ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, that's just bonkers too. Like, I remember the first Chula Vista and, having grown up and riding bikes. And then the thing I thought of immediately was like Loretta Lynn's, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you've ever been to Loretta Lynn's and you've seen all these kids show up and, on 50s and just do battle, like throwing elbows on each other, and it's wild, right? And it's something that'll never die. It'll continue to go and proliferate. And so I remember just thinking, like, holy cow, like, wait till those people see this vehicle. Like, it's every kid in America is going to need one of these, and it did blow up, and it was really cool because it was like we were talking about it the other day. It really brought this family element, like Steve Serapis. Like, hey, I have 2 sons. I want to get them into racing. They're this age. I can stick them in their Herps. Same thing. And then they can hang out and race at the same track that Dad's racing at.
Yeah.
And really begin to share that passion. And because of it, it's like it created this kind of legacy. And it's like I really dug it because I could see what that was going to mean to our culture. Like, it severely lowered the medium age, right? Because before that, that one of the things, to be honest with you, that, coming from action sports, that turned me off about off-road racing is it was older dudes, and a lot of them weren't in very good shape. So it was hard to be like, oh, that was really cool. This guy just won, X trophy truck race, and now he gets out of the car and you're like, that guy's not cool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That guy's not in shape.
Yeah.
Like, so there's a marketability part of it that we always stood on the sidelines, being in action sports culture, and went, how can we sell this? Like, how does this translate? And then after Trophykarts, it really created that youth movement that it's now still going strong and stronger because of, the evolution of UTVs as well.
Yeah, I just remember too. Lake Elsinore was the first race.
Lake Elsinore, that makes sense.
Yeah,
right.
Lake Elsinore was the first, and it was so mudded. Like nobody knew what the cars can do.
Right.
It's a dirt track, so nobody knew what they can do in there, and they mudded. Like, they just watered the track.
Yeah.
So we're like slipping and sliding just to climb the jumps. So we're just sliding all around.
Because in the beginning you were like figuring out like what parts worked, right? And you ended up with a chain drive.
Yeah.
And what was the engine you were using?
So at the time it was a Subaru Robin 9-horse engine. So it was basically a concrete cutter engine.
Right.
Like, it was like a Briggs and Stratton type engine that was a little more reliable. It can handle a beating. You don't have to tune it. You turn the thing on and go. And we would just take the governor out of it and go. And then we ran a CVT clutch in it so that you wouldn't be constantly burning up those. Because they had, back then, Go-Karts normally had just the standard, like, centrifugal clutches in them.
Right.
Little dry clutches. So those would just burn up. And you couldn't get top speed out of them. So everything was like about gearing, playing with the torque converters, which now you look at all the UTVs, that's basically the same thing they're doing. It's like they're playing with torque converters and belts and burning belts up. I mean, we were doing that, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of funny that they're still doing the same thing. And finally, like, look at Can-Am and the new Maverick, it's like, oh, okay, now we've got an actual transmission,
Yeah.
Now it's starting to change the game. But it just the evolution of it is interesting to see how UTVs saw the market way back then. And then it's like, okay, well, there's something there. I mean, I had when I had the Trophykart company, we had a group of guys got not poached, but they got sent this like to do a poll on a new model of vehicle that they were trying to unveil, and so they sent these guys out and like it was like a research study. So my guys went over there and they didn't know that they worked for me, but they're like, hey, if we came out with this single seater UTV and they did a rendering of it. It looked like a mod cart, and they're like, "What would what would you want to pay for this? And what do you think the demographic would be?" Like they were asking him all these questions, and so they came back to me and they're like, "They're trying something. Like they're
Sure.
looking into it." So it was interesting.
No, I'm sure that that they saw trophy carts and that was a big impetus for making the smaller UTVs for sure. It's interesting too because again, like back to parts, like what tires did you figure out to run with it?
Yeah, everything was based on golf carts and go-karts. So it's like the bolt pattern. It was like, okay, are we going to run a quad bolt pattern? Are we going to run what are we going to run? And so it just came out. We're going to do a golf cart. So it's like a 4-on-4 golf cart pattern. Douglas Wheel at the time made tons because there was a big golf cart craze for the river, and at the river everybody was lifting their golf carts and you had these little tires and with 4-on-4 bolt patterns. So it's like they made tons of wheels for them. I'm like, okay, let's do with that. Let's just make it as simple as possible. So everything was based on golf carts. Nothing was based on essentially racing, because I just wasn't dealing with the quad market. I wasn't dealing with any of the racing market. I just wanted to kind of have my own market or create my own thing. So yeah, it was just different.
It was cool. I mean, I remember the crowd reaction, particularly at Chula Vista, just like freaking out when the kids were coming out and rolling around. It's like baby ducks all doing battle, right? And they're all following each other.
Yeah.
But it was cool too because then that was step one, and step two is like, oh, now we got to make these things faster because the kids are racing these things from 6 to really 12.
So 15.
Yeah, even higher, right?
Yeah. So we had a junior 2 or junior 1 class and a junior 2, and the only thing that separated them was the age groups.
Right.
The cars were the same. So you had this 15-year-old in a car that can max out at 40 mile an hour, and he's waving at the crowd. He's thinking he's in just a parade because it's just not going fast enough. So yeah, the parents are like, okay, we want to step it up. We want to, like, what else can you do? And so there was this kind of push to get the cars to go faster. And it was like, how do you get them to go faster? But we're still dealing with kids. So no one's done this yet. How do you get them to go really fast, jump really high with a kid inside of this thing, and keep it light and keep it affordable?
Right.
Because that's we can build $100,000, little race cars. That can be done, but we're trying to keep that price point the same so that we had hundreds of people show up at races. Chula Vista had a couple of times, it was over 120 entries.
Yeah.
And we had to have all these LCQs, and I mean, this is crazy to get them in there.
Yeah, it's interesting. So then, when you saw the Razor 170 and 570 come out, what'd you think of that?
Well, I knew right away that was their answer to the trophy cart.
Right.
And they I know that they had a trophy cart on their sites. They had one there. They were messing around with it, measuring stuff out, testing it. So I know that was already going on. But I'm a small fish, so I was just waiting it out, and hopefully,
Yeah, it's interesting though, because you're a small fish, but then again, when you look at the effect that you had on off-road culture, it's a pretty big effect. It's a pretty important thing that happened, and then continuing on with UTV racing and then UTVs, right? That completely changed the landscape and demographic of our culture. It made it way more accessible, And even if you're a guy who you're not going to race, but you have kids, now you have something to put them in that, is safe, and they can go bang doors and crash it, and they're going to be fine.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the biggest thing too. That's the safety side. I've always been a proponent of this, the safety first. So whenever I build anything, it's like, okay, first off, whether we're gonna do 40 mile an hour or we're gonna do 150 mile an hour. Like what safety aspects do we have to look at? Like if it's we're not gonna build a 049 roll cage for a car that's gonna do 105. That's just, I mean, yeah, it's gonna go
too
fast
light.
once,
Yeah.
and then that's it. So that was the big thing with the kids. It's like we wanted to be kids crashing into each other without any issues. Nobody has had any problems, and with that many cars being built over all the years, we never had. We had liability insurance and everything. We never had one claim. No one ever had any issues. I mean, there was obviously kids got hurt, like they break a thumb or something like that, but that's just
Minor.
Standard racing stuff.
Yeah,
it's not
totally
negligence at all or anything like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So then, Trophykart things going like, let me back up a second. Like, how did you get into this?
So the Trophykart or all the way
off-road in general.
just the off-road in general. So I started right out of high school. I had a good friend of mine, Larry Plank. We flew together, like flew planes and raced RC cars together. And he and I worked at a hobby store. So I was manager at a hobby store, and he would come in and like, hey, we're gonna go flying, we're gonna go do this, we're gonna go shooting, and so it was always like he's taking me to different places, and he's like, I'm building a race car, I'm gonna race Mini Mag, my dad's funding it, let's go racing. And so I was kind of helping him do that a little bit, but then he really got me in, like hired me to help him with the race team when we started doing his 7 Open truck and then the Pro truck. He started racing a Pro truck. So I started building pre-runners at his shop, just designing suspension. I did like one of the first bolt-on 4-link kits for the Rangers. So I started that, like I built that, and then I built a bolt-on I-beam equal length beam kit that was modeled a lot after the Herbst pre-runner, that big red pre-runner that they had.
Sure.
And then I ended up building Jet Blue for Scott Steinberger, the Big Bird. I don't know if you're familiar with Big Bird.
Yep.
So I built that, and so I had quite a bit of cars, like pre-runners that I was building at the time, and everything was handmade. There was no CAD. There was nothing. It was just me notching tubes, sticking it in there, and laying stuff out. And I was huge into geometry, like suspension geometry. Like, let's change this. Let's move this over here. What if we adjust the suspension point so that it does this instead of that? And so when we did that, it was like, you couldn't beat these cars. So
Where did you learn that from, though?
it was just a lot of, like, the racing side of RC cars really taught me a lot.
Sure.
The progression of an RC car is so much quicker than a big truck, because it's like, you know what, I want to change the shock point and change the motion ratio a little bit on the front end of this car. Well, how long is that going to take? A week to do on a truck? How long is it going to take on this? 5 minutes to move like a shock pivot point over? How long is it going to take to change the caster angles, change this, change that? So you can just adjust things so quickly on an RC car and get it like to max performance, where you can see that in the evolution of an RC car versus a truck. They're just way further behind.
Yeah, it's interesting though, like, that you're pulling basically off-road race tech from an RC car,
Yeah.
and then applying it to full-size vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it worked a lot of times. Sometimes the scales don't work right, because we're talking about a much smaller, like the inertia that an RC car is going through, and the scale speed that it's going through is different than a truck. But the weight transfers are the same, like the way that the movement of the tires are cycling, things like that are really close. And so by that, I was able to just design things differently than what people were doing and coming out with innovative things.
That's interesting because, Carson Wernemont. Spent a lot of time RC car racing, and he attributes that to both how quickly he was able to, adapt to off-road racing, as well as, understanding what the vehicle is doing.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty crazy to think about, like, hey, by playing with the toy, you're learning about suspension geometry, like vehicle performance, right?
Oh, 100%.
So all the moms out there who don't want their kids to play with RC cars, here's the reason.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a big difference. And I can feel right away, or, like look at a car and it's like, okay, that car's, the anti-dive is way far off on the car. It's just not right. You can tell just by the way it's driving, the weight, and then the customer will come back and say, and I'll ask them, hey, how does it feel when you slam on the brakes into those bumps? They're like, oh, it feels like it's going to rip my teeth out. Okay, well, yeah, because your anti-dive is way off. Like, we need to change that. So it's just little things like that. It's like I can kind of tell what's going on. And it's a lot of just a feel versus like, I kind of see, I feel like I'm a little, I'm autistic in the fact that I'm like, I can look at something and go, okay, that's not right. This is what it needs to be. Let's move these points. Let's do this. And then, like things that I'll just kind of pull up in my head I'll, when I'm drawing them out. I'm like, okay, this is going to work just like I think.
Right.
And it does, usually. Sometimes it's like slightly off, but it's like normally it's like, this is exactly what I thought it would do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Attention Off-Road Nation. The Unlimited Off-Road Racing Championship comes roaring through Parker, Vegas, and Barstow in 2024. It's three of the most prestigious and competitive off-road races in the sport. It all starts with the return of the Parker 400 in beautiful Arizona, January 10th through the 14th. Then it's the biggest, baddest, most grueling off-road race on the planet. The BF Goodrich Tires Mint 400 comes roaring back into Sin City, Las Vegas, March 6th through the 10th. And finally, the climactic conclusion of the Unlimited Off-Road Racing Championship, the California 300, returns to Barstow, October 2nd through the 6th. Visit unlimitedoffroadracing.com for complete details. The 2024 Unlimited Off-Road Racing Championship is here.
Do you think that then gave you a jump start into, off-road fabrication?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like my background before off-road, when I was at the hobby store, we started a company called Scalecraft, and we were building scale warbirds. So I'd build P-51 Mustangs and Zeros and Hawker Hurricanes and all this cool stuff. And we would design them out of carbon fiber and fiberglass. And I'd spend all my time mold making, designing this stuff, and designing I'm like trying to figure out wing loading and try to change the wing loading so that it's able to fly at scale. Because if you took, like, let's say a Messerschmitt and took it and shrank it down, that thing is a nightmare to fly. It's too hard because the wing loading's different from when it's a big airplane. So you have to change the wing loading, change the square area of the wing so that it flies correctly at scale. So there's all these little things that I kind of learned on the fly, and that all those little things that I was learning, I was kind of building just fundamentals. Like when I started doing the off-road, I'm like, I know stuff that bringing, like Morgan Clark talks a lot about how he loves airplanes and the SRC1. I'm the same way. It's like airplane stuff is just like unmatched.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing when you understand, that you're taking this, whatever it is, 10,000-pound piece of metal and flying it.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense, right? And then you look at the level of detail and also the aesthetics of, especially like World War II planes, like, they're badass.
Oh, yeah.
They're badass. They look like these really cool, purpose-built, flying machines.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's interesting because he was talking about, I just love the fact that Morgan is doing these tribute builds, like that SR-71 build. He's doing like that F-100, like these builds that he's doing that are like more of artistic builds, which is cool because you don't see that a lot nowadays in the off-road industry. And that's really cool. And I love that stuff. I'm not as prone to do that as what he's doing, but I'm more like my forte is just like designing the ultimate suspension that you can possibly have for a certain vehicle. Like I go crazy with like suspension design. That's my thing.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So then you start building stuff, and then, what point did you decide? I mean, you kind of gave us the Trophykart story, but like what led to that? Like, what were you doing before that? Were you working for other people or working on your own?
So with the Trophykart, I started Larry Plank ended up passing away in an airplane crash. So we built an airplane together. It was an ultralight plane, and he ended up crashing out at El Mirage. And after that, that was my whole world. We spent every minute together building stuff. I'd build it, he'd race it. It was kind of like the relationship between like Ford versus Ferrari when you saw, Shelby and oh no, I just spaced his name.
The driver, yeah.
Yeah. But just that relationship, that's what we had. It was like, I'd build it, go run it.
Yeah.
And it was like that type of relationship we had. And when he died, I was like, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And I took over the company and that was New Line Products. And then I just kept building pre-runners. And then in the middle of that, I was like, let's try this Trophykart thing. Let's see if that works.
Yeah. And it worked.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty cool. So then, Trophykart happens, that grows, and did you sell that company or like?
No, still have it.
Yeah. So then Trophykarts, you were explaining to me the other day, is it hit like a critical mass where you had produced so many of them for the marketplace that people weren't buying new ones.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, because there's 3,500 cars and you age out, at the end of 15 years old, you're like, okay, well, we got to sell this car.
Yeah, don't fit in it anymore.
Yeah, so it's constantly being sold. So you constantly see them on marketplace, or you just see them for sale all the time. And so we're not building any cars right now.
Interesting. And so then what'd you start doing after that?
So we got into the can't beat them, join them. So we got into the UTV market. We started building Pro Rs. Right now we're building a series of race Pro Rs. We built a single seat Pro R for Roger Norman, which has got some really innovative stuff on it. And then I actually, when it was 4 years ago, we started doing, I designed a new suspension system that basically takes virtual pivots for the front end of the car instead of A-arms, and takes most of the load away from the steering. Because that's one of the biggest issues right now that all the UTVs have is steering issues. The electric steering is the downfall of off-road right now, because it just cannot keep up with the bumps.
Sure.
In the terrain. So this solution, it solved a lot of problems. We put this on a lot of the cars. Mitch Guthrie Jr. started running it. The Matlock started running it. Like Murray's, they were all running it. And it made a huge difference. I mean, you could run a steering rack that usually you had to replace every race. You can run that all season now.
And that was Xtravel, right?
Yeah. So Xtravel was the technology. We were able to use Xtravel as the company to sell the product. So Xtravel sells the UTV, all the UTV kits.
Right.
And then so right now I'm using that technology to build a Bronco, and I built it on a Bronco right now, and also trying to build it on other full-size vehicles. But right now the Broncos it's amazing what it can do now. The Bronco, we took all the load out of the steering. You can run a bone stock steering rack, hit whatever you want, no issues.
That's it. That's cool.
Yeah.
And so, just to explain to people, this is a front bulkhead kit, or is it?
So instead of normally you have A-arms, right? Mm-hmm. So you have an upper arm, lower arm. We got rid of the A-arms. So there's no arms. So it's a series of links. So it's like a 5-link system. Mm-hmm. So it's got 2 upper links and 2 lower links, and then a steering tie rod. And what that does is takes and creates a virtual pivot down the center line of the tire. And so since you're not hitting, normally when you have an A-arm, when you hit the tire from head on, like a obstacle, rock, whatever, it wants to spin the tire back. So when you hit the tire, it wants to move the tire back or to spin it around the axis of the two arms, and it breaks the tie rod, right? Or it breaks the steering rack.
Right.
With this system, since it's a virtual pivot down the center, there's nothing to pivot around. So the tire just wants to move backwards, which it can't because the triangulation of the links.
Right.
So it can't move. So then it takes all that load out of the steering. There's no load there.
But does it, and again, like I'm not an engineer, but I'm just asking questions. Does it take that load out, or does it move that load to another part of the car?
It doesn't move. It doesn't move it. So it's just applying it differently. So either way, like if you fully hit that, let's say the arms, right?
Right.
And the tire can't move. Let's say you hit it just right where it doesn't want to spin the tire back, but you hit it just perfectly where it hits the outer corner of the tire and wants to shove the A-arm back, which you see plenty of that, right? You see
Totally.
A-arms buckle, right? That's the exact same load that's happening. But now, instead of the tie rod taking that load, that same A-arm that would buckle is the links are taking that load. So it's the same load. It's just getting transferred differently.
And how did you come up with this? This was just knowledge that you had on other builds, and you're looking at the UTV going, hey, I can correct this?
So I went to Tesla for I was basically like a job opportunity that I had. I wanted to build some stuff for them, and they gave me a tour, and they showed me the new Model X car at the time, and the bottom arms were a virtual pivot arm, which is common in on-road. They do virtual pivots on on-road stuff. And I've never seen that before. And I'm like, what is this? Why does it do that? And they're kind of explaining it. And they're like, well, it's a packaging thing. It's a way to get the brakes because they got big brakes in it and everything else. And it's a good way to get everything to fit and still run the pivot where you want it. So all the way home, I'm just thinking, how can this work in off-road?
Right.
Because this is huge. If this can work in off-road, and then I spent the next year just drawing it, redrawing it, designing it. Because the problem is, like, for on-road is great because there's not a lot of wheel travel.
Right.
But once you get a lot of wheel travel, it wants to, I mean, all the angles go crazy. It wants to toggle things and flip things backwards. And so to get all that correct with wheel travel, that was the hard part. And once I figured it out, I built that for James, which he at the time had a bunch of quads. He's my partner for Xtravel. And I said, hey, I want to build this on your quad and see if it works.
Right.
So we did. And he went and drove it. He just came back. He's like, this is insane. It's like I have a steering stabilizer, but I don't.
Right.
And so it just changed everything. That once we did that, I patented it, like did a bunch of patents for it. And yeah, we've been building this stuff ever since.
So that tech can still be applied to other vehicles.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And that's the goal now, is like to try to license that technology to everybody. I want to be able to have like a company like Lone Star or a company like, you know, even Mason. Like I'd love to have Mason have a all-wheel drive truck that doesn't have to worry about steering feedback.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's a problem. It's like, you know, I was talking about it the other day, you know, as we've gone to bigger tires and heavier vehicles, like you're always finding like, okay, what does that cause to fatigue or to break, right? And now it's been, you know, steering boxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're losing a lot of those.
Right.
And, you know, guys don't want to run steering racks because steering rack's going to, you know, give you feedback to the point where it could break your finger or whatever, right? So it's interesting, you know, and again, it's like another solution that, you know, has been come up with by somebody who's within off-road culture, right?
Yeah. I showed this. Well, Steve Menzies got to drive a Pro R, or not actually a Pro XP with that technology.
Right.
And when he drove it, he's just like, I got to have this. This is, I want this. This is such a big difference on driving, drivability. And so we put it on his Pro XP and we did that. And then we went to a shop and we're installing it. And I went and at the time he had the Huseman all-wheel drive truck there.
Yeah.
And I go, hey, do you mind if we scan this and put this system on here? And he goes, go for it. So we scanned it. We started doing the work to do that. He ended up selling the car, but we still have that available. And I was trying to explain to him, like, imagine not having to run a RAM assist.
Yeah.
I mean, how crazy would that be?
Well, just not having that feedback, right? Like that's what's really interesting, which ultimately would allow the vehicle to perform better,
Yeah.
right? Because the bump steer, and then also driving through bumps, right? The front end is pretty damn critical.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like the also when you're going through, it changes the dynamic of how you drive. So when you're going through a whoop section and you're turning, normally when you're doing that, the car naturally, the wheel wants to straighten the car out as it's going through the whoops.
Right.
It just wants to move it because of that feedback. So you're constantly waiting for that, and the back of the car is moving around, and you're just trying to control. You're trying to wait for that to happen, right? You're just you're driving on the defensive.
Right.
So it's a lot better now to be, instead of being reactive, you're proactive. You'll be able to drive through without any feedback through that turn. Wherever you left that steering wheel is where it's going to stay through the turn, whether there's bumps or not. And it's a huge difference. It just makes it so much more comfortable.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. In the builds that you've been doing, like I noticed when we were at your shop the other day, you have a pretty cool vintage truck that you're doing. That you're freshening up, right? You're putting new shocks on it. The La Paz truck.
Yeah. So that's Tim Casey from La Paz Party Mix. We've known him forever. He came in with this 1984 F-150 that they built that back in the Jeep Poncho days. The goal of that truck was to beat Rod Hall.
Yeah.
That's what they wanted to do. It's like, we're going to do whatever it takes. They took a Jeep Poncho transfer case. They put a 400M engine in it. It's a it's a C6 tranny that they put in the thing. And the shocks, it had like, I don't know, 10 shocks per wheel or something. Right. It actually had three shocks per wheel in the rear.
Right.
The front was wild. It had this I-beam, a solid axle front with like these traction bars that went forward. Kind of like a VW kind of traction bar system. And so it was really wild suspension that they had on the thing. But we took all that off. We're running traction beams on it. We updated it. But what's cool about that build too is, like, I told them I'm not going to use any CAD. There's no laser cutting.
Yeah.
I'm going to do everything just like they would have done back in the day. I'm building the entire thing by hand. So everything you see, every little tab we put on it, we're hand cutting it. Every piece of aluminum, we're shaping it. Just making a handmade car just like they would have back then, and trying to keep the same build style that they did back then.
Well, like, then you're a glutton for punishment, because they have, like, we have all the technology now, laser cutting, et cetera, notching, all that kind of stuff. But, like, I think what you're doing is the correct thing to do, because I see, some vehicles get updated and it kind of ruins the vehicle, because you're like, no, that's a truck from the 80s. It shouldn't have, these things on it stylistically or aesthetically, right? So that's really cool. You're doing it all by hand. Have you had, like, a vehicle that you've built that you're like, okay, this is the one I'm the most proud of, or I love the most?
I'd say the, like, JetBlue.
Yeah.
Because I ended up building two. I built a twin to that. So I built JetBlue, and then I built it for Herzog. So I built two of them, but the Herzog one I didn't get to finish. So I finished the JetBlue truck, but the Herzog one got finished somewhere else. And I actually had four of them initially. When we were working for Larry, we had four of these that we were going to start building. Two of the chassis went to wide open, and Roger Norman ended up buying that car. And that one of the cars, so the car that got built for the Dust to Glory, when Mario Andretti got to drive.
Yeah.
So that was originally my chassis.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so they Wide Open built it. Jake Johnson ended up doing a lot of work to that and putting I-beams on it and changed it around. But that was the original frame that came out of Larry Plank's shop.
That's cool. I mean, it's interesting too, because Roger Norman originally came into this through Wide Open, which is a cool story.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's probably my favorite is the JetBlue, because it's like a full tube chassis. It was all handmade. There wasn't any laser cutting or anything like that. We were hand making everything, and we were working with new technologies at the time. Like Robbie Gordon had his internal bypass shocks that we were trying to use and make work, and just a lot of intricate little details to it that were just at the time no one was doing. We were just kind of hopefully it would work. Like the steering column was a bunch of 90-degree gearboxes that went up to get around, because we had to make the steering rack face forward. So we had these like 90-degree machine boxes for the steering to come up. The steering shaft came up in front of the steering rack and then went back into the steering column. So it's just wild things like that we did. It was a pretty cool build.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Is there a guy out there or build out there that you've seen that you're like, inspired by?
I mean, there's a lot of them. I mean, Morgan Clark is just taking it to that other level as far as the workmanship that he's doing and how he's promoting himself too. He's promoting the sport a lot better as far as for fabrication and people wanting to come in and as a trade, because that's kind of a thing right now. It's like everyone wants to be either an influencer or work in tech or something like that. But it's like, okay, he makes it look cool. It's like, this is a cool road to go.
Well, yeah, he definitely does a good job at sharing like the inside of building, right? Like it's not all just like, hey, everything's hunky dory. It's like there's problems. There's things you got to go in and figure out and troubleshoot and make them, work and make them better.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting that he's like, it's been interesting for me to watch and again, knowing, kind of who's who and what people have done. And going and looking at it going like, hey, he's a great promoter. Fantastic. Well, what about Nestor? And what about Craig Hall? What about Dave Clark? And, the Geyser brothers and so on and so forth. Right. So that's one of the things that I recognize is like, our generation and back was kind of, in a sense, sabotaged, right? To like not boast and self-promote.
Yeah.
And then you get the newer generation in and they're the opposite. They're like, camera on the phone all the time, looking at the phone, doing duck lips or whatever it is, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting, but I think that ultimately it exposes more people, not just to our sport and culture, but to the idea of like, fabricators are cool. Like being able to make something from your mind and then physically make it with your hands, like that's magic.
Oh yeah, I love that stuff. Yeah.
And especially at once you start getting your craft to a certain level, like Dave, like Dave and like, Morgan and Craig Hall and all these builders, right?
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things to me that I'm like, I don't know. It's just impressive because again, it's like you're building a car. You know what I mean? It's not like, hey, here we are today and we, took some clay and made a pot. You know what I mean? Right. It's like, no, you're building something that's three-dimensional, has intricate working parts that need to work together in order for it to work good. And then once it's built, you still are problem solving. You're still like, okay, well, suspension isn't as good as it can be. How do we make that better?
Yeah.
Right.
And why is it overheating when we did all the math and we're like, it shouldn't be overheating.
Right.
There's little things like that. You're like, oh, that's why, and you put it on a wind tunnel. You do like, we just were doing some wind testing with Roger Norman's single seater. Cause we're like, man, that clutch is getting awfully hot. And we figured different clutch packages and like things to cool it down. And then we're watching the airflow going over the clutch ducting and everything else. And so there's just it's just a constant project. You're always trying to make it better. And it's interesting because you don't have much time because it's a racing season. So it's like, okay, we have 3 weeks to completely revamp the intake system, or we have 3 weeks to I want to change it to 2 shocks per wheel instead of 1 shock per wheel.
That's always been kind of like the criminal thing about our sport is like there's not enough test time.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like you're building these vehicles and like you might get a shakedown or two before a race, but then they're racing. Right. It's not like, like some of these other motorsports where they're like, oh, we've been testing for a year or 2 years. You're like, what?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like we tested twice.
Yeah.
We tested at Plaster City and Barstow. So we're good. Right.
Yeah. Well, and I got used to that because like now I was doing, when I was building the Xtravel stuff, it's like, I told Mitchie about it and I was like, and Mitch Guthrie, his dad's like, hey, I'll do, like you're showing me this thing. It looks a little crazy, but I've seen your stuff. I trust you. Let's put it on. Let's try it.
Right.
Let's go to King of the Hammers. Let's go run it at Johnson Valley and see what it does. So I've got footage of him driving it. He's like, this is insane. This is great. But it's like, okay, can you build me another one or like redesign it to do this, and then have it ready for King of the Hammers? It's like we're doing it within a month period. It hasn't even existed yet.
Yeah.
And now I have to build it and it has to be raceable.
Yeah.
And not break. And it's like, and it's all proof of concept. And then, so when I do it, all my partners, like the Xtravel guys are like, wow, great. That was easy. Okay. Can you do this one now?
Right.
How about this one? Like, okay, we have 1 month to do this. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Like I'm getting lucky here. Cause like, there's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Well, it's part of it's luck, but the other part of it is like, it's your business. I mean, your knowledge, right? So it's like once you can get things to a certain, level of like, based on all your years of building vehicles, like this is going to work. We're going to have to get in there and we're going to make adjustments and tweak it, and it won't be perfect. But I think that's one of the challenges to off-road racing is a lot of times, you shake it down, but the real test is going to be that race, right? And, hopefully there's not a catastrophic failure that, ends the day, right? Because then everybody's like, oh, this doesn't work. And it's like, hold on. You just crashed it into a wall for 400 miles, right?
Yeah.
Let's figure out why this one little thing broke or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Off-road race fans, the 3rd annual California 300 off-road race comes blasting back into Barstow this fall, Thursday, October 3rd through Sunday, October 6th. Don't miss your chance to see hundreds of the country's elite desert off-road racers go door to door on a brutal 300-mile desert race course and witness the exciting conclusion of the Unlimited Off-Road Racing Championship season. Visit thecalifornia300.com for more information and to purchase spectating, camping, parking, and VIP tickets. The California 300 returns.
Yeah, there's a lot to the re-education of in this sport, right? Because like, let's say you come out with something new, it's like, okay, an ARM kit's an ARM kit, right? It's like, oh, do you like so-and-so's ARM kit or this guy's ARM kit?
Right.
Like, okay, it's still the same width, it's still the same thing, but it's like, oh, this one's boxed arms. Oh, this one's tubed arms. I don't know, which one should I go with? This one costs this much, whatever. But it's like, what is that thing? That's weird. I don't know if that works. And then the minute anything, like you said, happens, because you're trying to re-educate the public saying, look, it's okay to be different. This is better. This is new. This is the new thing. Give it a chance.
100%. And like, in particular, it's interesting because the Polaris Razor Turbo was such a good platform. And then when they moved up to the R, they, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the way that I understand it, is in order to get more travel out of the front end, they had to compromise and add scrub to it, which is one of the reasons why it gets so much feedback. So, you can say on a sheet that it's got 2 more inches of, and they made up this term usable travel, right? I'm like, well, what does that mean? Right.
Yeah, tire squish.
Yeah. Is there unusable travel? Like, like, oh, travel was travel, right? But then, your system basically corrects that.
Yeah, it gets rid of all of that, and which is great because it allows you to run with the travel you want, but then takes away the. And we did change the scrub the scrub of the car so it does scrub less, and then we actually did something for the back of the Pro R too. That normally the Pro R, the back is probably the worst out of every vehicle that's out there because it's got 12 inches of scrub in the back, so it track width changes 12 inches.
So just so people understand what scrub is, like that means that the wheel is moving in and out rather than just like I think people think like when suspension cycles, like the wheel is staying in place vertically and just moving in a straight line. That's not true.
Right. So let's say you have an 80-inch track width of the rear. At full droop, it now is 68 inches.
That's crazy.
So that's wild. That's so much movement. So you get a car when it's going through the whoops and one tire gets loaded and the other's unloaded. Guess where it's going to push it? It's going to push it to the loaded side and move the car. So then you get this car swaying back and forth. It's just the back's just, sliding around. And you're like, why is my car having no traction? It's just because it's scrubbing.
Yeah.
So we got rid of all that.
I noticed that.
Most of that.
Yeah. I noticed that in the Pro R in particular is that, whatever you want to call it, a loose car or a skatey car. I don't mind that because I like to throw my car around, right? But I'm comfortable with driving off-road cars. I'm comfortable with, especially buggies like class 1 cars and UTVs and what it's doing, right? And that kind of like moving motion in the back, I just use it as an opportunity of like, okay, that's what I'm gonna use this and use it to set up corners or whatever. But like the average guy, like I had my neighbor drive my Pro R and he's like, I don't like it. And I'm like, what don't you like about it? And he goes, it just feels sketchy.
Yeah.
And he couldn't articulate it, but that's interesting. So you added your suspension to the rear as well?
Yeah. So we got the scrub from 12 inches to 2.
Wow.
So now in the back, it's not track width changing. So it feels way more stable going through the whoops. And then the other thing that we did is we camber gained. So when it goes to droop, it camber gains. So let's say you're going into a berm, and right now the tire is like full. If it's drooped out and going into a berm at droop, that tire is laid over. So it makes it want to debead the tires so much easier because the tire's already laid down.
Yeah.
So with our system, it actually cambers the tire in. So it helps you're hitting the actual tread of the tire instead of the sidewall.
That's interesting because then, you also have the potential to damage the tire, right? Beyond just, debeating or like having the tire come unseated, it's like anytime you're leaning on the sidewall, your potential for a flat goes, exponentially higher because, you don't have the protection of the tread.
Yeah. Every time you land from droop, and if you're landing in a bunch of ruts, you're potentially trying to debead the tire. Because if the tire's grabbing that rut and it can't go outward, then it's trying to just, pull the tire out. Right. So yeah, it's a big difference. It makes it nice.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. So then, like you were explaining to me, the idea behind Xtravel is to take that technology and license it to, manufacturers, right? Yeah. And say, hey, Bronco or, TRX or, somebody like this is, going to make your vehicle perform that better, license this technology, put it on your vehicle and pay Nestor a whole bunch of money, right?
Yeah, it's a different market because off-roaders don't do that. They build something like, I'm going to build as many as I can and sell these. Right?
Yeah.
Which is great. But imagine if...
It's a limit, though.
Yeah, you're limited by, my resources, right? Right. And it's...
Although I will say 3,500 Trophykart, you do pretty good. How many UTVs has Robbie built now?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's up there, but it's like...
I think, maybe a couple hundred or something.
I think it's in the thousands, but yeah.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Like, that he's built or that are here?
That are here.
Oh, okay, well, that's great.
I think, I'm pretty sure, because we had talked a while ago, because we have a homologation number.
Oh yeah.
And he was above that. So yeah. But anyways, you were saying,
Yeah. So it's not having the resources like, and I don't want to limit the sport and say like, oh man, we can't do that and we can't do this. Like, I want to be able to have anybody just go, you know what? I want to put that on. I'm building my own spec truck. I want to be able to put, this virtual pivot technology on.
Yeah, it's interesting though too. Like, so what? Like right now, I can call you up and say, "Hey, Nestor, I have a Pro R. I would like Xtravel on the front or back and bring it to you."
Yeah. So we would build it, put it on, revalve the shocks, especially for the rear. The rear changes quite a bit because of that scrub. Since that's taken away,
right?
Now you're using valving, not scrub for compression. So it changes the valving quite a bit for the back. The front changes a little bit in spring rate, but mainly it's we do the whole front to back car. I mean, we're building full tube chassis there, and I'm working on trying to get a Maverick R build going right now too.
Nice,
and then put Xtravel technology onto that too.
Yeah, that's really cool. So then you have this. What's next?
So yeah, like I said, the biggest thing right now, my push is try to get the UTVs to that level. Be able to offer like we were talking about, the youth series and being able to produce something again like what Trophykarts were, but introduce that maybe in the UTV market.
Sure.
And be able to bring like some type of spec chassis or something to the UTV market and be able to say, hey, let's run this with the different manufacturers. So you have the same type of backing that we used to have back in the day with the Trophykart stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so people understand what we're talking about. We had lunch the other day, and one of my concerns is like Polaris no longer makes the 170 or 570. They make the 200, but unfortunately that platform doesn't really work for racing. Like, it's a good platform for, hey, I bought my kid a 200 and he can go play with it. Mm-hmm. But like the horsepower to weight ratio and the ability to modify it with aftermarket is very important to off-road racing because most stock cars, I mean, UTVs have done a fantastic job of making a really, really good car, but when you put it through 400 miles of the Mint 400 course, it's going to break.
Yeah.
We break trophy trucks in half.
Right.
So, finding those flaws and then, you reinforcing them, and sometimes having to go, okay, this part isn't going to work. Right. And it's the push and pull between us and our relationship with manufacturers, because ultimately a manufacturer has to manufacture a vehicle for a certain price, which requires them to compromise a lot. Mm-hmm. Right. And whereas, off-road race cars, the first thing you do is you build the durability into it and you're like, okay, I think this is going to be fine. It's not going to break. And then you break it and you fix it and you evolve that part, right? Mm-hmm. That's been the evolution of off-road racing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's interesting now, the position that we're in, and what we were talking about is, creating a new platform that has some longevity, is a raceable vehicle platform that, that manufacturers want to be involved in from the drivetrain perspective. But, we know from the build perspective, like that thing's going to live, mm-hmm. and you can race on it for the year or whatever, and you're not going to be replacing parts every race.
Yeah. And it's like the youth thing,
and it's safe.
The safety thing for me, it's always been number one for me. So knowing what I know with the Trophykart stuff, it's like, I know that I can build something that I can sleep at night knowing that a bunch of kids can get in there, beat on them, and you're not going to be able to hurt the kids, and that's where it's really important. And trying to take, like you said, a stock chassis, which is designed around a recreational use, where they're not expecting cars to smash into each other day in and day out on a short course track. So, and then you're trying to get parents or whoever, it's like, okay, well, this is kind of the basic rule. You got to have this type of cage and this and that. And then, you get parents that just end up spending 3 times as much that they were supposed to because they didn't know any better.
Right.
They bought some frame some roll cage that's not at all legal.
Yeah.
And you're like, sorry, you can't race this. It's not right. And or suspension that somebody kind of did in their backyard. It's like that just broke right away. This is no good. So yeah, that would really help out. And I think that getting these big manufacturers to be able to back that and say and see the writing on the wall. It's like, hey, we're making it easier for you guys.
Well, it's crazy. Like I remember, man, 20 plus years ago when Ford had come to Transworld Media and that guy who just left here, Fran Richards, right? He was running Transworld Media at the time, right? Mm-hmm. And he took Ford and we took him down to the turnoff for Ocotillo and we watched all the Ford Rangers come through with the tailgates lowered with motorcycles in the back of them. And they were so excited because their whole goal was to lower their medium age of who's consuming their products by 2 years, right? And we're looking at them going, we think we can lower that by 7 years. And so if the reason for that is that when you have a consumer at a younger age, you have them for longer, theoretically, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you're putting a kid in a vehicle at 6 years old and it's a Polaris, guess what he's going to buy when he's a teenager? He's going to buy a Polaris, right? So it's interesting to me that like the UTV manufacturers have the kids, but now it's like they're overlooking them. And I think it's a huge mistake on their part, right? Mm-hmm. For us as off-road culture, just like what I've said, I think it's massively important that we maintain and grow the youth racing, right? That's why we did it with UTV World Championship. And then as we've transitioned into, doing more races, it's a very high priority. Motorcycles and UTVs are very, very important to our culture because, both of them have a low barrier to entry, motorcycle being the lowest, right? Like I was that kid, broke kid from El Cajon. Hey, I got $600. I can go buy a motorcycle and then go off-roading.
Right.
And then, fast forward to UTVs and trophy carts. It's like, if I'm a parent and I look at a PW50 or whatever, I'm like, man, kids growing, I don't really want them to break a bunch of bones, and damage their knees or hips or whatever. Put them in a cage. Mm-hmm. And that was such an easy solution. And I just see a huge upside for it, for growth as well. And same thing for the parents, right? Like you go and you spend time with your kid racing off-road. I promise you that you'll have a better relationship with your kid, number one. And number two is that your child will be a better person because of, going through that physical experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with like when the trophy carts, when we first started really pushing them and they were just everywhere. I mean, you'd see manufacturers like with SEMA, you'd see SEMA builds like Ford trucks or Chevy trucks, whatever, with a trophy cart in the bed, and it's like, and it was painted just like the truck.
Right.
So it's like, they know who they're pandering to in a sense. Like they know that these kids, like, they're like, oh, I want to have the same truck that my dad has.
Totally.
And it just makes sense. Right. And so to be able to do the same thing with a UTV, like a youth group, and then not only that, but like you've got, like we were talking about before, with these kids on a competitive level at such an early age. Like you have the Mitch Guthrie Jr. I mean, you have Haley Deegan that's like in NASCAR, and
she's
and Sheldon Creed,
RJ Anderson, on and on. Like it's Corbin Leverton. It's like this list that's massive, and it's cool and it's exciting. Haley's like one of the ones where like I watched her at one of her first tests, and like the people that were at the track that were testing her were like, what the hell? You know what I mean? Why is she so comfortable sliding a car sideways in the dirt? Mm-hmm. I was like, well, she started at whatever 6 years old, you know, and she's not afraid, you know? So I believe that once she gets through the political stuff of NASCAR, you know, I think she's extremely valuable to them. You know, the jealous part of me goes, hey, come back and race trophy trucks, right? I want her racing with us because I understand her value, you know? But I think that, you know, she has a big opportunity doing what she's doing. And just a shit ton of talent, more talent than I think people realize.
Yeah, it's true. I got to see it firsthand, you know, like helping her train when we were doing all the Trophykart stuff and her ability to pick up things quickly. And have that no fear attitude that you kind of normally see in boys. So at that age, especially, right? You know, you got like,
except for her dad is Deegan.
right. So, but it's like to be able to see that and then see that growth. But then, like, you have where else do you get that? Like, as far as off-roading, like you said, like there's nothing else like that. So if you don't bring these kids in early on, then where does it go? Like you're gonna have at 17, 18, you're gonna have a kid trying to build a Ranger in his garage at one point or another. That's really as far as it goes. But that doesn't go to the marketability of the off-road racing industry, you know? So it's just a lot harder.
It's even further than that. Like when I see these kids and the confidence that they have, you know, and how it turns them into these just rad human beings who are like, they're not afraid. You know, it's the only thing I can compare it to is watching kids go through the process of learning martial arts, right? Like, you know, a lot of that is just conquering fear. And so is racing. It's like, you're going to get doored, you know, you're probably going to roll, right? And once you get through that and you're like, you know, you didn't get hurt, you didn't die, then it changes the way you look at risk, right? And you're just like, okay, you know, I can take this risk and I might go off or I might roll or whatever, but I know where the edge is now. So yeah, it's I don't know. I think it's really interesting. And, you know, from a cultural perspective, if I could wave my magic wand and go, okay, cool, we need, you know, tens of, you know, hundreds of thousands of kids racing. Because again, when you look at what kids are faced with now, you know, with social media and the internet and being born with a phone, like they're set up for failure, you know, and it's like it's a thing we've never had to navigate. Like we are the first generation of like, oh, you're going to be a TV casualty. You're going to be the kid that sits in front of the TV and you're going to grow up and you're going to be, something's going to be wrong because we're outside playing in the dirt. Right. And, you know, fortunately for us growing up in off-road, it was like, no, that's all you wanted to do was be on your bike, in your vehicle, you know, out in Glamis, out in Ocotillo racing, whatever it was, you know, with your friends and having that interactivity. So I think that the more that we can give kids that and reinforce that, I think the better off the whole world's going to be. Yeah,
I think so too. That's one of the big things I saw when we were doing the short course stuff with the trophy carts. It was like the family groups that started coming. Like at one of the Chula Vista races, there was this at night they did this scavenger hunt for all the pits. Everything was doing these kids were doing these massive scavenger hunts, and it's like where, you know, those days are over where it's like this crazy wild party going on. Like now it's like this family friendly, you know, party. So it's just a lot different than what it used to be. Yeah, it seems like to me. But
no, it is. But you know, and it's for us as a you know, as a race promoter, like, you know, we really dig it. It's like I saw it, you know, again with trophy carts where it was like the dads who had kids, you know, Rena Zenner, you know, Herbst, Serapis, McMillan, you know, they wanted to have that common bond with their kids, and now here's something they can slide their kid into, and it's like fun as shit, you know what I mean? So it's like there's nothing funner than off-road racing, you know, and especially when you can do it in a format where you're banging doors for 15 minutes or whatever the moto is, right? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's been like an hour or whatever it's been. Time flies.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate
thank you for having me. You know, it's been awesome, and yeah, whatever we can do to maybe talk about more stuff later about the youth movement, how to get more people involved, how to get like these other spec vehicles going. Like that's really important to me. I think that's a huge thing.
Awesome.
All right, man.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah.